Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining today. Welcome to a global discussion about the challenges we are facing as outsourcing practitioners in 2020. I'm Steve Sheahan of IBM, and I'm a co-chair of the Atlanta chapter of IAOP, which is sponsoring this program. I am delighted to be joined today by so many members from IAOP's chapters on both sides of the Atlantic. We reviewed the registration list, and I wanted to say welcome, bienvenue, willkommen, dobro došli, and that's Serbian in honor of Marko. The idea for this program originated in San Antonio at the 2017 IAOP Outsourcing World Summit. A group of us began a conversation there about the challenges we were facing as outsourcing practitioners in our various countries. And that conversation continued in a webinar that we broadcast on June 8th, 2017, which continues to be available on the IAOP website. At that time, there were social and political movements beginning to affect countries around the world that were combining to create new challenges and opportunities for the outsourcing industry. A renewed focus on the objectives of individual nations apart from, and sometimes in opposition to, the regional or global communities they're part of, was creating a new political reality in the US, the United Kingdom, and across the European Union. At that time, the recent American presidential election, the Brexit vote in the UK, and a number of similar political disruptions in several EU member states were all together prominent signals of a significant shift in the climate for cooperation around the world. Such global cooperation enables freedom of movement in a global economy, and that in turn facilitates a wide range of outsourcing solutions. So the tension between local and global concerns that was emerging then has driven a repositioning of nation states relative to their neighbors. This occurred also throughout Asia, Africa, and South America. And the widespread reassessment of how we should function in the global marketplace elevated public awareness of our industry, and it caused people to challenge the movement of work and skills across borders, the consequences to workers when work is transferred from one company to another, and the sometimes disruptive consequences of the transformations that outsourcing brings about. I am joined today by the panel you see on the screen of IAOP members from 4 countries. 3 of them were panelists on the 2017 program who are returning to pick up this conversation where it left off and help us elevate and evaluate all that has happened since. And I'd like to invite them to introduce themselves now. Let me call on each of them in turn. Marko, I'm going to start with you, Marko Kovacevic.
Thank you, Steve. First of all, I thank the International Association of Outsourcing Professionals and the Atlanta chapter for creating another great discussion where we can all exchange views, learnings, and things that the organization basically can share as an added value for all the members. I would like to thank all members for joining us at this panel, and I'm looking forward to open dialogue in that aspect. So as Steve said, my name is Marko Kovacevic, and I'm basically Chief Business Development Officer and Partner in New Startegy, a company who is basically business model design company. My previous experience was directly in the BPO industry and IT services. I exited that business a year and a half ago, and we started based on all the best practices we learned in the hardcore operations to help other companies in creating the new business model using the technology and new added values of, let's say, digital markets in order to improve their customer experience. I'm part of the IAOP family for last already 7 years, and I had an honor to be part of the basically the strategic advisory board and as well the European part of the IAOP. We call it the European Outsourcing Council. So that's in a nutshell. Thank you, Steve.
Excellent. Thank you, Marko. I'm so glad you could rejoin to pick this up again, as you were part of the original panel, as were you, Serge, Librot, if I could move to you.
Yes, so hello everyone. So I'm Serge. I've been working in ITO for more than 20 years. I've been doing all the sides of the aspect, meaning the customer, the providers, and now the advisor. So I've been helping my customers to transition, to develop new projects, new initiatives. And I'm IOP, COP for quite some times now. It's the certification from IAOP about outsourcing. And I'm also a member, like Marko, of the EOC, European Outsourcing Council, where we are trying to bring best practice inside Europe about outsourcing. So that's it from my side.
That's great, and it's great to have an advisory services point of view as well, Serge. So I'm glad you were able to rejoin. I'd like, just continuing in alphabetical order, I'd like to invite Jennifer Troy to introduce herself.
Hello, Steve. Hello, everyone. Steve, thanks for having me back. I'm happy to participate on the panel again. I am with Jennifer Troy. I'm with IBM Global Business Services. When we last spoke, I was leading strategy and offering development for our global finance outsourcing practice. And for the last couple of years, I've been managing a portfolio of accounts in the communications sector, which at IBM, that includes telco, media and entertainment, energy and utilities. I've been with BPO since its inception in the late 90s, and I continue to be excited about the evolution of our practices and the opportunities that are ahead of us.
That's excellent. Thank you all. And those were my three returning panelists, and we have a new recruit, John Yarnell from the UK. John.
Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's Jonathan Yarlett from Intelligent Sourcing. I'm the co-founder and publisher of Intelligent Sourcing magazine, which is a publication and a platform aimed at global end users. We are built on independent editorial, so it's very much about thought leadership and research, working with global vendors. And
John, did we lose you?
Seems so.
All right, let me pick up. And then, John, I'd like you to adjust your audio and come back, but let me continue. I did want to send a shout out of thanks to my colleague, David Powell, who moderated the 2017 program on my behalf and did an excellent job. And you can hear his work on the tape that's at the IAOP website. Our objective for today's discussion then is to learn whether the political forces that we discussed 2 years ago are continuing to affect our practices today in our various geographies. I want to see if we can identify new forces that may have emerged that are affecting our work in the same general area. And again, to focus on what are we doing to remain effective and innovative in a challenging environment. And I should again state at the outset that while our various political realities are impossible to ignore, we want to have a business conversation and not a political one. So I will invite the support of all my panelists in helping us keep the discussion focused on our business practices and on the needs of our customers. Again, participants may enter questions in the dialogue box as we move through the program at any time, and I'll raise them if there's an opportunity presenting itself, or we'll cover them off when we get to a Q&A period at the end of the program.
Sorry, Steve, I think I may have dropped out there.
Yes, you did. John, sorry. Continue.
Sorry, I briefly, founder and co-publisher of Intelligent Sourcing magazine and long-time supporter of IAOP, and also sitting here in hurricane-style weather in the UK, which is probably why I dropped out.
Oh, well, stay safe. And intelligent sourcing is one of the best sources of information about the industry. It's one of the best reads that we have around, including Pulse magazine, of course, but really, really very good stuff. So thank you for joining. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Steve.
The first question, let's just get right into it. I want to see if what effect, if any, is the current political climate having on outsourcing in your location? You know, when we discussed this 2 years ago, we made note of a number of phenomena, but it kind of felt too early to tell if they signaled significant trends. You told us that there was some hesitation about outsourcing in the marketplace, but we also said that the freezes that we were noting seemed temporary. In the Netherlands, we know there were some government projects that were pulled back in-house. We reported some elevated reluctance on the part of our customers to move operations offshore. That seemed to be an issue at the time. But I'd like each of you to share with us from your own geographic perspective, have these effects persisted? How would you describe the climate today? And Serge, if I may, I'd like to start with you. In our last conversation 2 years ago, you reported that you didn't see any significant change in Belgium and less political pressure on the industry there, as the next election was not until 2019, unlike the rest of us. You also noted some emerging concerns about the effects of robotics and a move to reduce the remote workforce. Help us understand, how would you describe the picture today?
So, in one word, I think the way I see it is uncertainty. So, the way politically things are moving is unclear. And in fact, what the company I see in Belgium are doing is that they cover themselves for all the situations, meaning that they make sure that they have a foot in every region to be sure that they can cover any situation that may arise. So what I see from the companies in Belgium is that they don't want to put their eggs in the same basket anymore. So they are still continuing to go to offshore destination, but they go to nearshore in Eastern countries. And they even try to take some local resource also in case of needs. So it's really the way I see it is the diversity of the solution to be sure that they can extend, they have already the partnership in place upfront, and to be ready to adapt to an ever-changing situation. That's one of the key things. What I see also a lot is the lack of resource we have in countries like Belgium, and I think it's the same in the Netherlands. So they try to also extend and make sure that they have partners that can help with the growth. Also the difficulties to find the right skills, and so the partners they choose are not just partners that can do the activities, but that can bring added value, be able to capture new activities so they can grow with the needs of the customer.
It's really interesting that how much uncertainty will certainly trigger that kind of caution. You know, one of the things about outsourcing is that generally in economic bad times it can be good because people want the savings that our solutions can provide. And in economic good times, they have more to invest in the kind of innovation that outsourced solutions can bring them. So that regardless of some economic fluctuations, outsourced solutions can be a key important part of what a lot of our clients look to us for. But what you're suggesting is, you know, the uncertainty is quite so much, and it's now coupled with a challenge in terms of identifying and finding the skills that we need, which is, I think, maybe a subtopic we're going to come to, that it really is kind of slowing things down and creating a lot more caution. Interesting. Marko, last time we talked, you were seeing a paradigm shift away from the labor arbitrage that people were seeking in outsourcing, and you were seeing a trend towards more added value, a heightened emphasis on innovation that would be available from that. Would you say that's continued? What do things look like now where you are?
I would say definitely it's continuing, Steve. And I think that's the path of the transformation of the industry, because, you know, like in the previous period of, let's say, 5 to 6 years back, it was all about, let's say, the right sizing and about the overall cost of service delivery. And it was usually focused on non-core activities outsourcing. But now, you know, as the technology is progressing and when we have more inputs related to data and as well RPA, definitely the providers who are surviving and who would be playing the game in the future, which will be substantially valued for the buyers, would be the players who go for the higher skill on one side, who are going for, let's say, under quotes, exotic languages support 24/7, plus adding the technology and new added value processes as part of customer experience. So it's not anymore about providing the capacity, it's more about providing the solution, new customer value proposition, and then as well proactive approach of an outsourcer towards the buyer.
Interesting stuff. And so, and skills, you say, are in fact a prominent element of that.
Definitely. Like skills plus technology, it's something which is changing the game. And what we have seen, for instance, in our region of Southeastern and Central Europe is that the players who just remained in, let's say, business where they provide the scale and language, like a basic stuff, they are going after massive consolidation now, meaning that they're either acquiring each other to go for the larger projects where they can have economy of scale for their clients. So it's still part of the game, but they cannot do it on their own. And there are several big investment funds as well coming who are trying to consolidate the region as well and maybe go public or sell to a big provider, in the near term future. And I'm talking about the guys especially who are in volume generation business.
And is this specific? Is it focused on on Eastern Europe, on the region? You said it's regional focus.
Yeah, so it's like, let's say, Southeastern Europe and Central Europe. This would be. Then there are some players emerging on the market who are like adding added value services, and these guys are going on their own. Like from my point of view, they have a chance of a different conversation. They are saying, if you just stay in the business which is ending with ER, meaning like, better, cheaper, faster, there will always be somebody who can be better than you are in these aspects. So I think that the region is slowly getting a grip onto it. Technology and the market is pushing it, because I think the region as well played a labor arbitrage and let's say the game of the cost for a period of time, and now the cost is increasing everywhere, but because the talent is not at the same price anymore. So that's why it needs to shift to added value.
Yeah, and that that actually dovetails with some trends that I would say we see here as well, in that it's continuingly important that there be savings, but it's essential that there be innovation.
Yes.
And access to innovation, that these partnerships are becoming much more strategic. They're not just a source of cost takeout, but they're a source of growth, because no one enterprise is really capable of managing and acquiring all of the new technology and rapidly growing up all of the skills that are needed with these disruptive trends in the marketplace that are requiring us all to be so much more nimble. So it's really put some very interesting opportunities at our feet in the industry, and some pressures on how well all of the players can respond to it. Interesting to see the consolidation that helps people step up to that.
If I can add something, I was in Poland 2 weeks ago to an outsourcing event, and I was discussing with an HFS consultant, and they did some study about Eastern Europe. And what I've seen is that most of the executives of major companies doing outsourcing are quite satisfied with the nearshore delivery, also because they can bring in skills that they don't find always somewhere else. And really, we see a trend in growing into the Eastern countries like Poland, Baltics, Hungary, Czechs, Romania, and so on. Those are really growing in the outsourcing market and to the delivery. So the numbers are quite interesting for them, because they still have a potential of resource that they can deliver, and they have a lot of universities. I was in a city like Poznan, where they have many universities, and they can bring quickly some new skills into the market, doing new things like digitalizations, RPA and things like that, which other countries focus more on the basic delivery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's really higher order solutions that people are getting into.
Yes.
Right, excellent. John, again, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you.
And very special status for you because, you know, throughout this entire period since our last conversation, Brexit was looming over the UK. And now 10 days ago, it finally went into effect. And so I have a lot of interest in hearing you talk to us about what has this been causing in the outsourcing space, both anticipating it and now dealing with it.
Well, I mean, as you've quite rightly said, we've just come out the back of quite a messy divorce. It really goes in line with what a lot of the others are saying, that there's still this period of uncertainty. And, you know, to be clear, absolutely, 10 days ago, we left the EU. But, you know, so a lot of people were kind of, you know, their thoughts were, you know, now we can kind of make decisions and look forward. But as we know, there's now a period of transition until January next year. So not a hell of a lot has kind of changed or moved forward in the last 10 days. There's still that uncertainty. What we are finding, though, is there is a big question mark over now and a big worry about things like free movement of goods, but also, more importantly, freedom of movement for labour. And could this mean a diminished labour pool for the country where, you know, we do rely on often skills coming in from other countries? So, you know, when we were part of the EU, the borders, although there were borders, were to a point meaningless because they were allowing, you know, free movement. They were allowing kind of, we were taking advantage of business and legal advantages of the EU and various grants for startups and so on and so forth. So we're still waiting to see really what happens. And I guess there's two styles of thought here. Some businesses are seeing it as a disadvantage for the reasons I've mentioned around labour and around trade. And then others are maybe seeing it more as an opportunity in terms of adopting, you know, emerging trends like RPA and AI and different regulations, and really, you know, embracing things like automation to, I guess, to make sure they're hitting demand and making sure that people within those positions they may no longer have are covered by the automation. The outsourcing sector seems to be responding well. Another interesting thing was that from my own client base, while a lot of this was going on and leading up to, you know, elections and what was happening, the companies that were, the vendors that were doing a lot of public sector work and a lot of the inward investment agencies we worked for that were predominantly government funded were asking us to kind of put everything on hold. So to stop marketing them to our readership, to stop pushing their services, to stop pushing their own offerings, because they didn't know, you know, where they were going to fall once everything had landed. So, I noticed one of your questions was about, you know, the effect it had on certain industries, and certainly those that were working in the public sector, you know, were really kind of struggling to see, well, you know, what's really going to be happening here. So it's been an interesting time. You know, we not long, I mean, it wasn't that long ago that everyone was trying to get GDPR compliant. So people were working on that, and now, you know, now we've got this. So it is uncertainty. It is a bit of wait and see at the moment. I'm sure over the coming months there'll be more kind of news. It's interesting what I think Marko said about savings against service, because, and I think you said it as well, Steve, you know, in the current climate, a lot of people would say outsourcing is the sensible thing to do to, you know, to save costs and to streamline things. But there's still that
Oh, John, we may have had another storm interruption. See how brave outsourcers are. We broadcast in all kinds of conditions. We're like the front lines here. I want to hear more about that. We're going to circle. We're certainly going to circle back to John when he reconnects on that.
If I can add something while John is coming back, is that I spoke to the person responsible for the Polish English United Kingdom Alliance, and they see a lot of UK companies that are serving in Europe, creating a center in Eastern countries to have a foot both in UK and in the Eastern countries, so they can continue to manage and support their customer from whatever the political environment becomes.
That's interesting because I know that, Marko, you actually brought that up 2 years ago, that they were anticipating that then when Brexit was fairly new, that is exactly what might happen. People would establish outposts so that they can sort of leap over the new walls that were being built up. It's a really challenging, when you think about how we do these solutions and all of the solutions that people look to us to provide have these components of people, process, and technology that make them up, whatever they are. And the technology, quite naturally and easily, we're used to it overarching political geographic boundaries. It's what ties the whole world together. Processes themselves really soar when we can make them as broad and expansive as possible, as intelligent and connective across whole functions and an entire enterprise, if we can do it. And that certainly speaks to wanting to transcend. And then if you interrupt the flow of people and skills and say, but this part won't, this is going to stay in these little boxes or side-by-side silos, you do some real damage. And what I was hearing John describe was people deciding, well, I can do this instead. So if I cannot move the people, then maybe I can get my savings or my innovation from RPA. So we look to the technology. We're taking this three-legged stool and we're saying, well, this leg is not broken yet. Let's see what we can get out of that, But it would seem that if that's the approach, then there's going to be a slowing of innovative solutions somehow. And I'd really look with some optimism to the folks who say, no, what do you have to do wholly different here in order to preserve the trajectory of the kind of excellence that we were approaching when we had greater freedom to operate as a global community. But very interesting that, people are finding ways to, how am I going to do this anyway? I'm establishing an outpost there and I'm going to continue to function so that I can serve my customers wherever they are in spite of these obstacles. While we continue to wait for John, I did want to hop across the Atlantic and focus on our U.S. experience. And Jennifer, when we looked at this in 2017, we noted that there was some slowing down of the willingness to move operations offshore and an emphasis on, sort of transforming to a better business model. But I'm curious as to where you see that we are now.
You'll remember, Steve, when we last spoke, we were just months into a new presidency here in the United States.
Right.
And a lot of election campaign promises around bringing jobs back to the U.S., securing borders. So for clients that had not already offshored, I was seeing some reluctance, kind of taking a wait and see approach for how things were going to flush out. Mm-hmm. And I'm happy to report that I didn't really see that become a trend or really take hold. In fact, one client who had a long time standing wait and see approach to offshoring has recently offshored a significant part of the work that they were performing in the U.S. As part of their overall transformation. So kind of swung the pendulum the other way, especially for that particular client. Mm-hmm. I do see massive emphasis on moving to better, business and operating models. Thinking about, in the technology that we've talked about, is really maturing to the point where some of the things that we're able to do and the things that clients are thinking about, really are possibilities now. I see massive focus around ERP implementations, upgrades, moving to the cloud. And as part of that, our clients are trying to get their data in order so that they can take advantage of AI, machine learning, all of these cognitive capabilities. They're looking at how do I link my processes to better together with intelligent workflows and automation. And this goes way beyond RPA. It's really smart, intelligent workflows that helps us to build straight through, good user experience processes. And then how do I make my operations smarter with some of the things that the industry has been looking at over time, whether it's design thinking, whether it's agile, just how do I keep driving that continuous innovation into my processes?
And it's really interesting because what you see is this sort of stimulus and response kind of thing of, well, how do businesses react to this? Because you're absolutely right about the technology. It's driving us forward so fast and creating such new possibilities. And each time it does, it is in an expansive mode. So if you think about just the use of data, for example, some of the solutions that we're focused on, well, I have a talent solution, so I'm focused on my workforce data, and I'm just looking at my HR system of record or something like that. But when you really start to expand and innovate around all of the sources of data that you need in order to run an excellent talent portfolio, you're quickly branching beyond just the data about my workforce to the data about my community, to the data about my reputation in the community that attracts certain skills. So the whole use of data as a data lake, as a data stream, as something that's extremely expansive across the entirety of an intelligent process, that's an automatically expansive thing, and that is really going to be resistant to the kind of contraction or boundaries or restrictions that we've seen imposed by some of the political realities. Really interesting stuff. John, are you back?
I am, yeah, I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. We're concerned about your safety.
No, I'm okay.
Okay. So we were talking about, the reality you had in terms of, the immediate effects. Not a lot in 10 days is changing, but there was a great deal of anticipatory stuff that was going on in terms of coping with that and ensuring that the new political reality didn't represent a restriction or a slowdown in what businesses were able to do around innovating.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's, as, my colleagues have said, a lot of it's around, a lot more people are now kind of embracing the RPA and the AI and the machine learning. There's a lot of people now that are also still where they feel there might be a period of risk are getting involved in a lot of partnership agreements as well to try and minimize. But I do think that over the next 3 or 6 months, as we come towards the end of the year, which I, imagine will come pretty quickly, I think there'll be a lot of interesting changes and certainly worth keeping an eye on the public sector space and those that are public sector outsourcing vendors, and just seeing how things change there. But as I said, and I hope you caught it, I think one of the big areas are going to be the freedom of movement, and are we going to end up with a diminished labour pool, and are a lot of those people now going to adopt a bigger kind of machine learning strategy?
I'm absolutely persuaded that's an extremely important aspect of this topic. In fact, I think it's going to take on a life of its own. I wouldn't be surprised if we make this a regular series and assemble ourselves again, if we're not really much more focused on the whole labor, talent, and skills initiative, the centrality of skills to the challenges we all face with any of these things is just becoming more and more apparent as we look at it. but staying with where we are right now, and this has been very helpful, guys, just going around to say, all right, well, what is the reality? And we're seeing, you know, some things that looked like there were restrictions early on in the US were not, and some things are freeing up again. And then some other things that were looming, you know, really are changing the business behavior and the kind of solutions that we think we can have and find available, and certainly a change in emphasis in what we're looking for. I'm interested in knowing about the new stuff. So new legislation, new regulations. We talked about Brexit, and we talked about some of the immigration restrictions that are certainly a feature of what we're experiencing now. And we talked a little bit about GDPR, which was, again, new then, but now is almost kind of, we've all figured out a way to accommodate those regulations, and many, you know, are recognizing the wisdom and the ongoing nature of that's not going away in terms of how we treat our data. It's become an extremely prominent public topic that has seeped into the consciousness way beyond our industry to just the general public in how all of that operates. But what else is there now beyond those kinds of regulations, or any the discussions about new restrictions or movements that might be affecting our business? Let me just ask you to report out if you can. Marko, are you seeing anything in the Eastern zone?
Well, I think, as you said, Steve, I think everybody is now at this stage compliant with GDPR in one aspect. Everybody practice it from, you know, like it has been already a period of 2 years of full engagement. So most of the players who have international contracts are completely aligned with it. I think as well, a lot of them reach the standards, and, you know, like the thing of having the data protection officer as well as a new kind of a post has been picking up. So there is more and more oversight of the way of how the data is gathered, and as well how the data is protected. So in that sense, this is something which has been very interesting. And in line of, let's say, these changes in legislative changes, what we see as well happening based on that was a new way of having potential products where you would be having like a classical outsourcers basically carving out part of the operation which is related to customer support from the big players. And that's big to big players, right? Before it would be just a contract of the outsourcing. Now, because of all the costs related to it, risks related to it, and the way of how they can structure it, they are as well, let's say, buying out these parts of the operations, which became a new product along the way. So that's, let's say, in a nutshell, how the paradigm is slowly shifting. Not everybody has the bandwidth to be able to do the carve out. So that's why this has been reserved to the bigger players, or the players who are basically consolidating in the region, and they have bigger purchasing power, and then on the other side, better position on the market.
So they find a way to cope with the new reality and move forward anyway.
Yes, yes. And the good thing about it is that when these kind of, let's say, new legislation and new rules create basically new products, I think that's the added value for everybody, rather than just being, let's say, scared and trying to find only the way of how you can address it. It was rather as well a movement towards what can be a new service in.
Right, exactly. Okay. We cannot stop the innovation altogether. People are going to figure out a way around it. It's like water continuing to flow. Serge, what are you seeing? Are you seeing anything new? You were the ones with the most recent elections. Has it kicked off any legislation that's going to be changing things for you?
So Belgium is a strange country. So we had elections, but we still don't have a new government. So they are still discussing who's going to work with whom. So. And we don't see the end of those discussions. So I don't expect a new government soon. And we had elections in May last year, and still there's no view of where we are going. So the focus from the regulators are not really in that aspect so far. What I see is that GDPR still, even if the companies are working on it, there's one point that is driving some companies' activities, the cybersecurity, and the risk that some attacks may endangered data. And so I see a lot of companies' activities to protect themselves, because the recurrent, even for small companies in Belgium, there are more and more attacks and more sophisticated. So that's one of the key points that is affecting the way people work. And it has a direct impact on GDPR if you compromise your data, in fact.
Two very important points here. So taking them singly, I wouldn't feel so bad in Belgium. I mean, that the kind of political uncertainty that you've described is what's becoming emblematic. There were the reports of the results of the Irish elections just this morning showed the same sort of thing, an unusual divided government, opportunity for additional cooperation between political parties, but a lot of uncertainty in terms of the clarity of direction that could be available for people. And we know all that. There's always slowing businesses down for that. And you raised the cybersecurity. Obviously, that's been a big topic within IAOP. It's something that affects all of our members when we're entrusted with, in our solutions of securing the data of our clients. A big issue. It's an issue for my company as we help clients address this around the world, but it's an industry issue for all of us. And very recent reports, yes, that the ransomware demands and things like that are on the increase, and we have to be very clever. The race for innovation against the bad guys, you know, where that's concerned, is unrelenting, and it seems to be accelerating. So, two very interesting trends that you know, we all have to cope with in this industry. Jennifer, are you seeing anything new? I'm just thinking in the US of the kinds of things that we're talking about legislatively. If we get past, you know, some of the visa restrictions and the talent, the movement of talent, I'm thinking, is there anything else that we are helping our clients cope with?
Yeah, I think certainly things like GDPR, data privacy, cybersecurity are all top of mind, you know, for all of our clients. And as we kind of got through GDPR, you know, I kind of look at that as last year, at least setting up the foundations, making sure we had the right measures in place, making sure we had the appropriate agreements, you know, across providers and their clients. It continues to be a focus, you know, as we go through day-to-day operations, and making sure that we do have the appropriate protections in place for sensitive data. You know, we talk about, you know, the immigration. That's really the only other thing I'm seeing now, and I don't know that it's really even so much legislated, and it's really more in allowing people to come from other countries and work in the United States.
Right.
You know, that there's just a funnel that only so many can get through, and, you know, in an amount of time. So we're just seeing that's taking a little bit longer than it has in the past.
Mm-hmm. And I know we're not alone among countries that are trying to balance the demand on the skills of their own populations and to supplement those skills in a kind of a nimble way. And it's really hard to be as agile as, you know, we need to be as enterprises when we can't command the skills and deploy them as rapidly as our clients need them. So yeah, that was bound to affect us.
I agree, and you know, I think it's only going to get worse as we talk about. You know, there's statistics in the market that say, you know, while your skills used to be good for 10 or 15 years in the past, now, you know, they're expected to be good for 2 to 3 years. So there's this continual learning that we all have to make sure that we take upon ourselves in order to stay relevant. And then some of the new capabilities that are required, you know, not just in front office or core functions of an enterprise, but also in the back office. Things like data scientists are going to be really, really important, you know, in back offices too. And they're just, we know today, there just aren't enough of those skills out in the market.
Right. I know we tell our clients, and I've heard this said broadly, that the successful organization of the future is talent-centric. It's organized around deploying those skills as quickly as possible. And skills are just the oxygen of business today. So anything that is, a political consideration that limits access to skills is difficult. Anything that doesn't encourage, the free development and cultivation of new skills among the part of a population, which is the most efficient way to do it, is to retrain the resources that you have, is also going to be slowing us down if we can't do that as quickly as possible. Okay, John, did you have anything else on this?
Again, I mean, inevitably there will be, leaving Brexit will have an impact on a number of areas from a legislative point of view, whether that's financial services, procurement, data protection, employment, which obviously is a big one that we're talking about. But again, and I feel that I'm not really adding anything because it's still a waiting game, unfortunately. What a lot of people are doing, though, is, or they're being encouraged to do, that parties that are, getting involved in outsourcing transactions really should carefully consider the contractual process and whether they need to put something in there now or put, caveats in there for a later stage. They need to make sure that they're covering themselves for any kind of practical or economic impact of Brexit.
That's really an interesting concept, John, you bring up, and it reminded me of something I heard earlier this year, where there was, in contract discussions, a desire to, on the part of a customer, to say, I want my solution to be future-proofed, which is that I want it to continue to be innovative year in, year out. And if it's not, I'd like an exit opportunity from our agreement, which is a way to say I cannot be restricted or denied access to innovative technology. And I want all of my partnerships to be committed to that kind of dynamism in their support of me, so that we get contracts that have to continue to grow and innovate, even within the contractual framework, which is a real challenge for the way we think about these things. But I see that as something that's going to be incredibly important to people, because we're talking about this very thing we're talking about, which is the accelerated requirement to be innovative and highly skilled and right there in the moment with what those enterprises need in order to secure their customers' trust. We have to be able to get these things into their hands as quickly as possible, and they don't want to wait a year because their contract is not yet expired. They want us to be doing it. So it makes our partnerships more dynamic in order to be successful, and that's a big challenge for everybody, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a huge challenge for the providers. Yep. Because things are moving so fast that it requires a lot of investments upfront, not knowing if the customer will adopt them or not. So usually the providers, and some providers tend to find one customers to build their solutions. And in this case, most of the customers are expecting already the providers to come with a complete solution. So it's quite challenging for you.
And especially if you're basing it on, running an operation out of the UK, where a big chunk of that is based on, certain skills, or even operating within certain languages that, to date you've been able to use and to get and to quite easily facilitate. But moving forward, and a contract's based on that, but moving forward, that may not be the case.
Right. You lose flexibility.
Mm.
Right. At a time when it's becoming increasingly important.
Yeah.
This is really, it's going to be, we're going to continue to be taxed by this. And as I said, we can hear this again, that the labor component and the skills component. It's such a dilemma when you think about the challenges we have are being presented by what the technology innovation is driving. We need to have the new tools, but not everyone is trained on using the new tools. The technology itself should assist us with that. It's just the whole issue of access. It's not a technological issue. The issue of access, of getting people to the training and getting training to the people, and making sure that we have, all of the educable people, in proper supply, so that we can do that. And some of these other things that are being restricted keep the whole thing from working. So it's really interesting to me to see a kind of dilemma that the UK will have to address, for those things, but as will any economy where certain restrictions are being imposed. I do want to pause at this point in the dialogue and just remind our listening participants that you are invited to share your own experiences of what these issues and how they're playing out in your geography and in your political environment. Or ask any questions that are raised by what our panel is discussing and put them into the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and we will take them up as we move forward. Let me then move on to sort of the action, the action section. If we think about, we've been describing a current reality that's a challenging one, and it's growing more challenging. And we're seeing some people innovate around the challenges and to try to address them. And that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in the new sources of innovation, of how we overcome some of the inhibitors that are thrown in our path. If I've got a political obstacle, what am I doing? How creative can I be to get around it? So I'm interested in knowing how you see outsourcing industry in your area growing our practices. How are we continuing to innovate and overcome inhibitors? How are we collaborating with our clients to get some of these things out of our way so that we can continue to succeed in the marketplace? And how are we ensuring that we can maintain access to the skills we need? So just now looking future forward, what are we doing as an industry? We've got a lot of healthy, clever people. As we'll see again, when we gather next week and we assemble and all of the ideas popping and flowing, we'll learn a lot more about it. But what is this panel seeing? Let me just go back to you, Marko, and start. How are we innovating and overcoming some of these obstacles now?
It's a $1 million question, Steve. I think that it's a fluid process. I think the pressure of the market for change of the model and as well how outsourcing can grow in the future is basically creating a new three-way partnership. That's at least how we see it in our region. What it means is that, we get traditional big services players, like you guys are in IBM, for instance. We have a local growing player with a special skill set, and we have a startup who has a breakthrough solution which can connect the dots in between the two. And I think, this is what we are seeing as a new value proposition coming on the market, which gives basically the security from a big brand. It gives the special focus on the skills and finding the people to scale up in the certain geography, meaning from the outsourcing partner on the ground, and then the agility of the solution, which can be tailor-made in cooperation with the startup. And this is something I really feel and I see as a future potential value proposition on the market, because where market is going today is not where it was, and it's asking for more collaboration rather than competition. And I think the outsourcers who get this on time will be the ones who will be surviving the game.
So it's almost an idea of new consortium, if you will, and partnerships across enterprises. I really like that idea. I think that you might be onto something very important with something like that, Marko. It reminds me of some of the innovative things that our impact sourcing colleagues have done in reaching out to new geographic areas. They're actually pulling in whole new entities and sources of innovation by making the pie larger, if you will, and bringing in newer participants. But that partnership between the well-resourced behemoth multinationals and then the local firms that can preserve some of the agility even in the midst of political restrictions. That's a really interesting dynamic that well might point a way forward for a lot of different areas of the world. Very good.
I fully agree with you.
Yeah. That's exciting. See, that's the kind of thing that can happen in our industry. And what we can do in IAOP, of course, is shine a light on it and talk about it and then take some of our success stories and share them with our colleagues, as we'll be doing at OWS. But, I like hearing about it here because I really do think that that's an important idea.
Yes.
Sir, John, Jennifer, anything further on something like that? How are we innovating?
So, I mean, I think that there's massive interest that I'm seeing across clients in really driving to digital transformation. And I think that as outsourcing providers, we can be huge participants in that, in really helping them to, reimagine processes on an end-to-end basis. Think about as they go through their ERP, either upgrades, migrations to cloud, or just changes, how that fits into the context of that reimagined process on an end-to-end basis. And then just continue to drive this transformation journey, to help be able to take care. It's a multi-year journey.
Right.
Helping to prioritize what are the key steps now? How do you get the most benefit early on? And how do you create that mindset within your organization? Because a change is coming fast and it's going to be constant. So part of it is helping the organizations to be able to create the capabilities to absorb that change and to not resist it. And then I think a lot of the thought leadership and the expertise that we can bring as providers, having seen how processes run across many, many different companies, gives us the ability to help with those reimagined ways of working. How do you digitize your processes? How do you best optimize your ERP? What are the other enabling technologies you need to sit around that to make sure that you've got a really good end-to-end process? And then how do you integrate all of that with intelligent workflows so that you're improving user experiences, you're improving client experiences, vendor experiences, employee experiences, all of those things. And really taking a persona-based look at how processes are designed. And there's multiple personas in every process. If you design for just one, you're leaving out a huge group of stakeholders. So really being thoughtful in how processes are designed going forward so that they can keep up with the rate and pace of change.
And I think it's an important idea you say, which is, if you think about the earlier days in outsourcing industry and outsourcing solutions, it would be a guarantee of some incremental improvement. You could, to Marko's point earlier, something that ends in ER, right? It's better, cheaper, faster. You can make those kinds of improvements. But today, the transformations that we can do are much more comprehensive. And people are starting to look to us for exactly those kinds of things, to say, no, it's got to be future-proof. It has to have the innovation built in. And so it's our industry that can help affect some of this fundamental change, to say, you're really capable of rethinking your business with the tools that can now be put at your disposal. And it's important that you not draw a box around what you want from your partnerships, but that you have that expansive conversation, that you're willing to look at fundamental redesign from all of the personas to say, what could this business look like? And how could I support my clients, ever more fully if I make a more bold approach to process design and agility? Interesting, very, very interesting stuff. I have a question from the listening audience I wanted to bring up that asks, besides the political boundaries, do you see any issues in regards to cultural issues with respect to outsourcing? So culture versus political boundaries.
I do think that it obviously it depends in terms of culture to culture and what geography you may be looking at. I think, are you talking culturally in terms of kind of the way certain countries do business and things like that?
I would think so.
Yeah, I mean, I've been very lucky in the last year to travel to lots of different countries and see how they operate. And I don't want to keep harping on about, kind of workforce and staff, but as you brought it up around impact sourcing, I think you look at places like South Africa where they've got such an amazing, vibrant culture within the sector of, really wanting to work, wanting to do more, wanting to go above and beyond, compared to certain other countries where, and also there's a lot of initiative there, right? You don't have to be on the phone the whole time, telling people exactly what to do. They kind of get a brief and move on with it. Whereas in other countries that I've been to, you really have to be very, very specific in what you want from that vendor, to the point where you would literally have to say, if you, I know it's just an example, but if you were getting out the car, you'd say, right, put your hand on the door, pull the lock, open the door, get outside. So cultures do have a lot to do with things.
Well, I will just briefly add to John's comment. I think it's very relevant. I think in today's world, we can divide different geographies in basically two types of approaches. One type of the approach is the reactive approach, where you basically coach and guide the conversation. So there are certain outsourcing services which are rather being done that way because you don't want to risk the process, or the legislation is very tight in that aspect. The second thing is the proactive one, where basically you always get new ideas, solutions, and an extra mile. And it's highly appreciated, especially for the players who have more room into maneuvering left and right and creating the special value service for their clients.
And I wonder from a cultural point of view, if the difference between the two is a matter of trust. So if you're through highly prescriptive outsourcing, I want you to do things exactly this way. This is, I'm drawing a box around what my provider can do, versus come, let's innovate together. Let's take on this challenge and have a freer flow of creativity across our organizational boundary. That's a nervier thing to do. That might be a cultural artifact of this period of uncertainty, of an inability to have that kind of trust cross-enterprise. It's essential, of course, to real innovation and the long-term healthy partnerships that create great things in the commercial world. But it may be in shorter supply now as things settle out around who do we want to be to one another in these communities in which we operate. I have another question in from the audience. This is a challenge to those of us in advisory services. Hi, I still feel the advisory service is falling behind on the outsourcing and agile agenda. Serge, that's you. What can you say for yourself here?
Falling behind, I'm not sure, but it's an ever-changing world, so you have to decide where you try to cope first and what are the priorities. So when you are the advisor, you need to focus on some of the things that are the priority for your customers, like RPA, artificial intelligence, and things like that. Myself, if we speak about agile, for example, it's something I'm dealing with for last 3 years. I try to recommend that in some situation, but outsourcing and work in an agile way, for example, is challenging. I've been facing nightmarish times dealing with contracts where you have to do agile development because you never get things on time. Your customers change the requirement every 2 weeks, and those kind of things, you need to understand how it's working. So as an advisor, you need always to train yourself on the new things. So I did focus on agile. I did focus on RPA because that's the key things the customer wants to see. But it's a challenge for everyone. It's not a challenge only for the advisor. It's a challenge for the providers also.
It is a challenge, and part of the challenge, I'm sure, is the whole framework for doing the business, right? We're very habituated to thinking of contracts as static. We set up a deal. We have an exchange. We have an allocation of responsibility across a boundary line, and then we play it out. And what is demanded now to be quite as quick and nimble as one needs to be in order to be competitive anymore. You need contracts that will function like constitutions. They have to be extremely flexible and accommodate new realities with greater and greater speed, and that is very difficult to do. It doesn't challenge just the lawyers. It challenges the operations people and how we make sure that we're being fair to one another and defining things properly while we're all moving together at warp speed. It would require a very high level of trust to function effectively in such an environment. And it's probably the kind of thing we'll be learning more about as we move into the whole accelerated world that we're trying to do business in.
Yes, and the key thing is that sometimes the customer forget is about you need also the budget to be flexible on that.
And we have an additional comment: making agile work in an outsourced multi-site setup is a big challenge. Along comes SAFE, S-A-F-E, and new methodologies which customers want proof points of. And should we have an agile standard for outsourcing? These are real-time comments I appreciate very much coming in from the audience. But
so Steve, one of the things I would say, trust has always been, essential to our relationships and especially in outsourcing. I think there are a lot of things that we see now that help to build trust better. Co-creating solutions together, with the client versus being prescriptive.
Yep.
Using design thinking techniques focused around personas, I think are all really critical. I think agile as a software development methodology is, essential as we build tools into our processes. And, we call it fail fast, get your MVP up and running, and then build confidence in capabilities over time, as opposed to a big bang type of an implementation. But I think agile is also important for operations and really changing the way our teams on the floor deliver the services day in and day out.
mm-hmm.
So it's how can the outsourcing providers apply those concepts to, drive continuous improvement better, to have the people who are, knee deep in the processes day in and day out have ownership and accountability for driving those improvements.
Yeah. It's sharing the transformation obligation.
Yeah. It can't just be one person or one group. It has to be, top down, bottoms up, sideways. It has to come from everywhere.
Yes, and one thing is that agile for software development is one thing. You can put your team in the same location and do things like that. But when you move agile to other parts of the organization, to the operation and so on, you don't put people all together in the same room. You don't have small teams of people. So it's a difficult part to adapt agile into the functions in the organization. And but that's what at one point customers are starting to expect.
Yes, we have a comment from the audience to say the same thing. Agile in software is relatively easy, and of course that's where the term came out of, our IT development. But taking it out of software is the challenge to human resources, finance, other BPO processes. All of that has to become more responsive and decalcified. It's really, really very good. Let me see. I just want to make sure I'm looking in the Q&A as well. Okay. Nicole, I may have you check on the Q&A. It looks like there's two things in Q&A, but I can't seem to access the box. I just want to make sure that I can have visibility to that. I can read the chat box, but somehow my double clicking is not working on the Q&A portion. But while we look at that, let me, there's some other questions I wanted to get to. I'd like to focus on things that we don't have that we could use now. You know, we've been talking about what some of the problems are and how people are innovating around them and what some of the emerging trends may be, and then just the nature of this challenge. But what is there some single thing you could point to that would help us through this environment that you don't now have? And I'm thinking about that. Is there a new tool? Is there a new policy? Is there a new attitude that might free up some of this and help us be more broadly and consistently innovative in the face of any of these possible restrictions?
What I see some customers are doing, they are doing more and more some partnership with universities to get the talents where they are, and they can drive the courses also for some of the key things they are looking for inside the organization and the needs of innovation.
Mm-hmm.
Adding up on that, I think there are three components. One was mentioned in the questions. I think there is a shift towards the change of adopting Agile in a way of how you will change approach towards the outsourcing services. And it's not easy because it has been a traditional industry for a long period of time. And for certain outsourcing services, you know, too much Agile can bring a lot of difficulties in compliance. The second thing is what Serge mentioned, the way of how you will attract talent. And the new generation, you know, you won't be attracting millennials with just doing the repetitive, boring work. And this is where RPA plays a big role. And on the other side, where next generation of services, which are closely correlated with data analytics and data science, are something which can go more into the added value and more into the overall value of the industry. And the third thing, I think, is the thing which we as well touch based upon, is like how we can leverage the collaboration in between different players in creating like an end-to-end value outsourcing process.
Mm-hmm.
I think from my end, it's possibly something that's already there, and it's almost a bit of a pet peeve, I imagine. The amount of people from end user companies that will approach me at an event or drop me an email and you know, just try and get my advice. And typically the questions are, well, you know, we've heard of RPA, we've heard of AI, you know, we've heard of machine learning. We know people are adopting it and embracing it, but what is it? What actually is it? How's it going to help my business? I mean, I've also had people say to me, you know, I understand the concept of RPA, but if I adopt an RPA policy or operation in my call center, where will the robot actually sit? Which is a bit of a strange one. So I think where I'm leading with this is more information, more, you know, relevant information that can be digested in a sensible, manageable way that really gives end users, you know, the full understanding of you know, what the new processes are, what the new technologies are out there. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, just around RPA, but it can be, you know, around, you know, omni-channel or chatbot, whatever it is. But I do feel sometimes there is a lack of information there for people to make an informed decision.
I think there is. I think there's a great hunger for this, John. And actually, I mean, you're in one of the best positions to help putting out information the way you do, because I get a great sense on the part of customers that there's a sort of a free-floating anxiety of, I know I should be doing this. I know I should be applying AI. I know I should be doing more with RPA and robotics in my business, and I'm not quite comfortable in how to begin, what my risks are, what makes sense and is practical. I don't want to automate the wrong things. And it points us back time after time in these conversations to what Jennifer was describing and the comprehensive nature of the transformations. It's like, don't just go automate something. Don't just throw a bot at something, but let's take a look at what your business is, how you service your customers, what your broad intelligent workflows look like, to see how you might reconstruct things and reimagine things in a comprehensive way to avoid the kind of missteps that you have. And of course, having a knowledgeable partner who can step you through that, I think is, and which requires the high trust we were talking about earlier, is a good path to go, even for mid-sized and smaller businesses. But there's a hunger to do that, to exactly what you're describing, to say, you know, what does this mean? I want this translated into some practical terms, because it sounds, on the one hand, cool, it's exciting. I don't know what to do with it. I don't operationalize it in my business. And taking that on as part of our job as outsourcers might really be, you know, more consistently, might be a really good play for this industry if we can, you know, educate our own customers as to what it is we might be able to do with them and incorporate those things into our practices and our approach to them. Because I think you're absolutely spot on, is that everybody wants to be able to cope intelligently with what new resources are and what the new technology allows us to do.
Absolutely. And I'd go as far to say, Steve, that I also think, you know, it's, as vendors and people that are selling in products and services, it's also our responsibility, you know, to make sure that these people understand, the benefit of the products they're getting and how they can be best used and so on and so forth. Often the questions that I get asked are questions that people don't necessarily want to ask, you know, like in an open forum or in a Q&A or whatever it may be. But, you know, it would be great if they had some, and you know, maybe it's something that IAOP can look at, you know, maybe it's something that there are, you know, maybe guides or something of that sort whereby, you know, we can deliver information to people that are, you know, either just setting out on their journey or possibly second, third, fourth generation outsourcers that maybe don't need to know how to do things, but maybe want to know how not to do things and how not to make a mistake.
Right. Yeah, getting started in the virtual world, or AI for the beginner, you know, but any of those things. It's a tools approach. And one of our listeners, Alan Aronson, is pointing out that you have to have your processes in place before you can even contemplate automation.
Yeah.
It's totally true. I'm sorry, go ahead, Jennifer.
No, I agree. I mean, my comment was going to be, you know, a lot of times we hear clients wanting to experiment with new tools, and I get that. But if you're not careful and you don't have the right use cases in place, you can spend a lot of time and money and not deliver what you're expecting to. So I think a process-led discussion, you know, helps, you know, that are a process-led discussion enabled by the right tools in an end-to-end process construct, you know, is something, you know, as an industry, we need to focus our clients around.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the other things that I see too as, you know, kind of a ubiquitous challenge, but not necessarily focused efforts, is really around data quality. You know, in some places it just seems it's too hard. Everybody has data quality problems. They have data from multiple sources. You know, how do I get started? It is a real challenge. Mm-hmm. And I think the important thing is you just have to get started, because it's a problem that's not going away. So it has to be prioritized. But until we're able to trust the data, we will suboptimize the value of all of these new and improved, you know, wonderful tools that are available to us.
Well, that's right. I had an interesting conversation with a client around the issue of, you know, I'd love to be able to take advantage of some of this stuff, but I don't think you understand how poor my data is. Uh-huh. And the idea was that everybody's data is poor, and you cannot wait to have everything scrubbed before you start to implement some of these things. And some of the new technology actually has self-correcting data scrubbing properties, so that if you set up what it is you need, you can address that problem in the actual operation of the solution. But again, this is the kind of thing of, you have to be willing to step out there and take a risk with a trusted partner to be able to guide through some of these things with all of the risks that everybody attends, particularly with data, with the security of data and the accuracy and reliability of it. But you're right in that it's a big challenge, and it points us back to the point that a couple of you guys were making earlier, which is the whole comprehensive solution. Take a process approach first. Don't just throw a bot at something or automate the wrong thing. So, and all of those kinds of things, that kind of innovation that we've been talking about, requires a set and network of trusted partnerships and reliable advisory services, and all of the things that we all want to try to be within our outsourcing industry. I have another question I just wanted to raise that somebody asked, which I thought was interesting, which is if how are different geographies incorporating rural sourcing or crowdsourcing apart from impact sourcing in order to retain agility in the face of political restrictions. So if you think about that it's a sort of an interesting idea. If people put walls up around it, then are you able to do something creative within your geography or within wherever you're restricted to act that will actually be innovative right there? And you're going to be compelled to do something that you might not have innovated around before, but these restrictions cause you to do it. Any ideas on that? Have you seen anything like that?
So I've seen, Serge speaking, I've seen also growth in crowdsourcing. Crowdsourcing is one way to go around all the limitation, because crowdsourcing, people can be anywhere, and that's one way people go around it. So I've seen a growth from the customers about looking into crowdsourcing to find new solutions, or even from providers to do themselves crowdsourcing to go around some of the limitations they face currently.
Mm-hmm. Somebody said that I think there's a great work of art happens when you have almost all the tools you need and not enough time. Because it's restrictions that really call forth the creativity we need in order to move things and advance something forward. It'll be interesting to see as time goes on and these challenges play themselves out, if that's the way our industry is able to step up to it. And of course, we all hope and want to have a role, and IAOP is helping us do that, in helping us all succeed in that particular challenge. I have to be mindful of the time, although I could talk to this panel all day long because you have such a rich experience and some really interesting ideas about what's coming next, which is what we all want to see. But we're almost out of time, and I want to thank our panelists for revisiting this topic with me. And you're persuading me that it would really be well worthwhile to check in periodically on this topic and to double check on how are we maintaining healthy practices and serving our clients effectively in the disruptive environments in which we are forced to operate. This has been a report card on innovation in our industry, and I think we're coming out with some very interesting scores, so I want to thank you for that. I'd like to thank Nicole and the team at IAOP. They give us excellent support in producing these programs and in fostering these kinds of exchanges, so thank you very much. And I also want to thank all of our participants today for your attention and your questions. We welcome your feedback, as we do your requests for future topics that you would find helpful for your progress in outsourcing and the progress of your clients. And we'll hope to see many of you in Orlando next week for the 20th Outsourcing Summit. Please stop by the IBM booth to say hello to me. Safe travels to the conference, everyone, and thanks again and have a great day.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks for moderating.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for moderating. Big thank you to all the participants and to IAOP for facilitating as well.